for having me this morning.
If we could just one moment, I'm sorry, there is a question from the floor.
So is this still delegation regarding this motion that's now just before us?
No.
This motion?
This motion is a motion that you actually brought to my attention, and I'm bringing it now to Council. So I appreciate your support, Councillor Whitehead. Pam, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me this morning. I'm a Canadian Union of Postal Worker. I work for Canada Post. I have for 31 years. As you know, the Post Office is in negotiations right now, and we've been trying to bring back postal banking. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but I'm going to talk to you about it. So we want a post office, a bank for everyone. What is postal banking? Postal banking is a service that will provide savings, checkings, bank machines, online banking, credit cards, debit cards, prepaid cards, money transfers, including remittance. There's a lot of people that live in Canada that send money home to other countries. Financial for housing, investing products, RSSPs, foreign exchanges, and others. Services such as counseling. Why is postal banking practical? Postal banking is in 60 other countries, over 60 other countries in the world now. Postal banking is not a new and radical idea. We had it in Canada from the Confederation until 1968. What happened was the big six banks took over. Canada Post, the postal bank, couldn't compete with the big banks given people the interest that they were getting because Canada Post's bank was not in it to make money. 1 billion people have accounts at post offices around the world. It increases financial inclusion, promotes economic development, and generates a lot of jobs. Here we are again where we had postal banking in the past. Canada Post did a 4-year study on postal banking. We asked for the report on that, and out of 800 pages, 711 of them were redacted. So we do have Judy Foote, Minister in charge of Canada Post and Canadian Union of Postal Workers, asking for an unredacted copy of that. And in one of the pages, I would have brought it, but there's nothing to read. They're a very heavy book, 800 pages with, nothing to read in it. But one of the pages did have this on the top, that it would be a win-win strategy. And this is Canada Post's study, not anybody else's, just Canada Post. Why a postal bank in 2016? The banks are failing us. Canadian bank industry is portrayed as a model due to regulation. They're not meeting the needs of growing numbers of Canadians. They're focused on profits, not service. Service cuts, branches are closing, foreign investments, and high fees for the public. It's the most profitable sector in the economy. The 5 big banks in 2014 made $35 billion. That's $1 million per day, excluding stat days. That's profits up 19% in the last 2 years. Canadians pay on an average of about $185 annual just to have a bank account. That's not including when you go somewhere and use an ATM machine, which isn't your bank. The banks charge anywhere from $1.50 to $5 to use your ATM machine, your card at another bank. It costs the bank 0.34 cents per transaction. The big banks have a better record serving the medium to high income customers, not the lower. ATM machines, like I said, are the most expensive the population has gone up by 20%. Bank closures have decreased by 22%. Largely this is in rural areas and low income areas. We have twice as many post offices as there are Tim Hortons. We have 6,300 post offices around the country. Class, race, and geography excursions. It's been proven, they've done studies, that 3 to 15% of people don't even have a bank account. Many do have bank accounts but can't access them because it's too far. Rural Canadians with bank accounts that rarely access their banking because they can't get to them. Prince George, BC study found that 50% of Indigenous population used the payday lenders because, even though they had bank accounts, because it was more convenient for them. The sad thing about payday lenders is a lot of people use them. If you're getting paid on Friday, but your rent or your bills are due on Wednesday and you're stuck, where do you go? You're going to a payday lender and you're going to pay for that. So in the long run, out of $100, you're paying like, I think it's $18 or something like that. And if you don't pay it back in the 2 weeks, you're paying even more on top of that. It's a shame. Large banks have been closing operations in small towns and villages. The CPAA study found that 1,178 communities with a post office, out of the 2620 that responded, have no bank or credit union in their community, but they have a post office. Provinces with high rates of financial exclusion, no banks and communities with post office rate. Newfoundland, Labrador, Nova Scotia, British Columbia are some of the highest. Here, we'll show post offices than there are banks. Postal banking to the rescue. Across the world, postal banking exists and are making high profits. We're not in it to make high profits. We'll do everything at a lower charge. One of our main goals is to help the low income, the elderly, the Indigenous, and the revenue that we do bring in, we can put back in to the public service and bring back the door-to-door that Canada Post took away. We do have a mandate to promote financial inclusion. The Kiwi Bank, a New Zealand postal bank success story. They have 7 branches, 34 million investments, 100,000 customers, their first profitable year. They have over 800,000 customers now. I was talking to an MP a couple months ago, and she said she had friends come in from Italy, and they wanted her to take them to the post office. And she said, why do you want to go to the post office? He says, well, I want to do some banking. So that's the first she had heard from it. And here it goes to show you, too, that the Australia Post is also very lucrative in postal banking. The UK as well. Japan, like I said, there's over 63 countries that have postal banking, and it's all very lucrative. So how can we make this happen in Canada? We have over 600 municipalities that have had passed resolutions that support postal banking. We just got Toronto, I think it was about 6 months ago, Toronto passed the resolution for postal banking. Almost 2 out of the 3 respondents, 63% stat poll, said that they are in support of any expanding services at Canada Post. His main goal is to privatize Canada Post. In 1982, Michael Warren was our CEO, and he said that there were over 2,000 communities in Canada which had a post office, but no bank, and he suggested postal banking. He wanted it. 1998, Canada Post used to provide a service, and this CEO as well wanted. And then in 2010, we had Moya Green. She also said that she would think about postal banking. But the main thing is, right now, our CEO wants no part of it, and we have a lot of support. We have CCPA has done a whole report. I didn't give you that because it's a lot of paper, but it's saying postal banking would be very lucrative within Canada and a good thing for the public. The Inspector General has also, they think it would be a good idea to expand financial and banking services within Canada. This is our Puffy the Pig. We take him all over the country with us to promote postal banking. We also had an RV last year, and we went across the country promoting postal banking. And the outcome is people want this. People want this to save money. People want this. We want to put the money back into the public's pocket, not the big banks. This is a bank for everyone, not just the rich, not just the ones with good jobs. This is a bank for absolutely everyone. I was in City Hall a couple months ago, and they have started a pilot project with TD Bank for homeless people. There's a lot of homeless people, and they haven't got ID to get a bank account. So they've started a pilot project with the TD Bank where these people have a card and they have a bank account now. So they don't have to go to the payday lenders to get their checks cashed. So I'm here today to hopefully ask Hamilton City Hall, the City of Hamilton, to jump on board with us in support of postal banking, and hopefully this resolution will pass. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time, certainly bringing lots of information to GIC today. We do have a full speakers list. Councillors Whitehead, Johnson, Skelly, Jackson. As the chair of GIC, I'll always keep my comments and questions to the end. But before we get there, I'd like to recognize Member of Parliament for Hamilton Stony Creek East, Mr. Bob Bertina. We also have former Ward 9 Councillor Brad Clark, and we had Judith Bishop here, who was also a former school board trustee, so just like to welcome them. And of course, Bob's wonderful wife here with us today as well. So thank you for joining us. We have item 8.1 as moved, which is a staff report, which was tabled from the June 15th. So there she is. Hi. Sorry, Jessica Brennan. My apologies. Thank you. Jessica Brennan. Sorry about that. We have the staff report, item 8.1. Do we have staff here? Motion to receive. That's right. You got it.
If there's no questions, yes, thank you.
My apologies. I got thrown off by all the VIPs we had in the room today, Stephanie. And Jessica, my humble
60 countries currently exercising.
63.
63.
And the only one that isn't profitable, for some reason we're not sure, is Brazil.
Appreciate that.
They're not doing well.
I can also tell you that what is happening in the banking industry is a bit concerning in regards to access. I thought it wasn't successful, but they closed the Royal Bank on Upper James and moved it out towards Ottawa Street, and there was a lot of seniors using that particular branch. I know I went to the East End looking for a Royal Bank, and the closest Royal Bank was kilometers away at, I think it was Eastgate, Center Mall. So you're seeing that there's less and less banking or brick and mortar taking place, which makes it more difficult for those, as you indicate, that may not have access to computers and software and so forth to do their banking. So clearly, as a result of the converging of the bank system, something needs to fill the void.
Right.
Your point, we have Canada Service to fill that void.
Right. We already do money transfers. We do a lot of e-banking. You know, we have e-post. So we do some banking already. So it wouldn't take, and we already have the infrastructure. Why they're closing banks, I'm not sure.
Appreciate the. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Canada Post has been given the legislative and regulatory right and a monopoly to develop and evolve Canada Post offices throughout the country. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
So I guess one of the points you want to make is they should optimize the success of the program and offset the services with the fundamental services, which is the mail-to-mail.
Exactly.
Thank
you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whitehead. We have Councillor Brenda Johnson.
Yep, thank you, and thanks for your presentation. I've been to a few countries, at least from a layman's perspective. The two things I wanted to ask you, you touched a little bit on the federal representative, because this is in fact a federal issue.
Yes.
Okay, so if this postal banking is set up, can you explain to me if it would follow the same rules as the banks do and the same guarantees as the banks do? How does this work?
It would have to. We would have to be open on Saturdays, just as banks are. We would have the same laws, the same rules. We would have to follow that.
Mortgages
Yes.
and all those things as well. So you
Absolutely.
wouldn't deviate from any of those rules. It would still be federally regulated.
It would be, yes.
Thank you.
And I like to say that I've spoke to over 63 MPs, federal MPs, and they're all in favor of postal banking except for the one. So, yeah, and they are encouraging us to expand.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Very much. We have Councillor Donna Skelly.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. One question, how do we know, especially in light of the fact that the current CEO is not supportive of this particular initiative, how can you guarantee that this would be a more competitive opportunity for the consumer? How would it be possible for Canada Post to offer more competitive fees?
Well, because we already have the infrastructure, like we wouldn't have to make $35 billion profit. We wouldn't get everybody. I think when we had postal banking before, we only had 4% of the population had postal banking. So to answer your question, we wouldn't have to charge people $5 to borrow their own money or use their own bank card. You know what I mean? Our fees would be much lower.
And you're suggesting that based on just presumption? There's nothing to back it up. You haven't had a guarantee. I mean, I think that this is something interesting, but where is the guarantee that the user fees would not simply mimic what we have currently in the big banks?
That's something that would have to be written down, and they have done a lot of studies. The CCPA has put through a study stating that we would have tops, where right now there's no limit to how much they can charge, right? We wouldn't be able to lose money. We'd have to charge something, but it wouldn't be what the big banks are. But no, there's nothing in writing as of yet because it's still a proposal as to get it up and running again.
The Chair, could you and would you consider including a guarantee, a written guarantee that that you would be offering far more competitive user fees?
Yes.
Councillor Tom Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Pam, thanks for being here. Appreciate your presentation. Pam, I just pulled out a couple of your slides here that are all part of management. One of your slides say even people in Canada Post management think postal banking is a good idea. You go back to Moya Green. I take it she was Chopra's predecessor as president. Sounds like she was giving it serious consideration. The former Chrétien government with the cabinet minister Olay thought it was a good idea. And you're going as far back in 1982 with Michael Warren. That would have been during Prime Minister Trudeau's time, Elder Trudeau's time, suggesting it's a positive step, could fill in a vacuum. I know you can't speak for management, but before I get to the current president and his current position, can you give me, and I take it you've been with Canada Post for a while, can you give me some idea, I know you can't speak for management, can you give me some idea as to why it hasn't been implemented up to now, Mr. Deputy Mayor, when it sounds like some past presidents and cabinet ministers all were saying, hey, this is a good idea. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Pam?
What's your feeling on that, Pam, why it wasn't implemented up to now?
My feeling is, I know it's in writing that Moya Green said she would think about it, but I don't believe that she was on board for us at all. Why it didn't get up and running, I can't say, honestly, I don't know. So there was a lot of red tape. We had a lot. Believe me, the big banks are already writing to us saying, no, you can't do this. They've already written to the federal government saying, no, Canada Post cannot get into banking. We're the private sector. We monopolize this. We don't want them in. We've already got letters from them. So I guess we probably got bounced back and forth through the banks.
Well, the big banks, along with the petroleum industry and the insurance industry, are all billion-dollar corporations, so they're all doing just fine. I appreciate, Pam, the honesty of trying to explain. Mr. Deputy Mayor, obviously the current president, and this is a leftover from the former administration, the former government of the Harper government that's no longer in place. So I've detected that there's a tone, that there's a change in tone, hopefully in Ottawa. We have one of our two government MPs here with Bob Bertina, our former mayor. Good to see you, Bob. And MP Bertina is, I believe, part of the tone that is changing on a lot of fronts. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would suspect that obviously the ultimate decision, even though it's an arm's length agency, but we know the government appoints, usually the board of directors. Word on the street is about Chopra and no longer having maybe the government that he had backing him during what he was doing in his process. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to you, Pam, I would suspect that if we can join the other 600 municipalities across the country, provide that support, then maybe we'll encourage more MPs on the government side to see if they'll do something about it. Thanks for being here, Pam.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Jackson. Appreciate the comments. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you. Pam, thanks very much for coming. It's great to see such a great presentation on something like this. I do have a few questions, and my questions revolve around things you said through the presentation that just strike me as, I just want some clarity. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, you said in 1968 they discontinued postal banking because they couldn't compete against the major banks.
Right.
And so I guess coupled with the comment you made about how postal banking today would offer lesser rates, they would be competitive with the other banks. I'm just wondering how that's changed. Like, I mean, how if they discontinued it because they couldn't compete, what's changed that means that they can compete today?
The big banks wanted the 4% that the post office had as postal banking people. The big banks wanted them that 4%. So they raised that you put your money in our bank and we will give you a little bit more interest. Now, when in the Confederation time, the average person didn't have a bank account. There was no bank accounts even allowed for the average person. Postal banking started where kids you would get a little piggy bank and they could open up bank accounts. People just didn't have bank. It was just for businesses, and the average person didn't have a bank account.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I appreciate that. But so I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No.
So again, how do you know that you're going to be able to be competitive with the major banks? You know, they have ATMs in every corner and in every
We would
grocery
also
store.
have ATMs as well. Yeah, but well, see, the thing is, when you're charging, if you go to somebody else's ATM machine, we wouldn't be charging. There's no reason to charge $5 to use a machine that's costing 30.034 cents. Do you understand? Now, when interest rates go up, we would put our interest rates up as well. Now, if the big banks are going to fight back and put their interest rates up very high for people that, what they're making, maybe it won't work. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know the statistics on that. I apologize.
So it's questionable.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't have the answers for that. I apologize.
Can you tell me, of the 6,300 post offices across the country, how many of them are standalone? Do you know how many of them are standalone post office?
What do you mean by standalone?
I mean, they're not in a drugstore or some other kind of retail establishment.
That's not including the drugstore ones. They're not run by, they're not unionized. They're just paid employees through Shoppers Drug Mart.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so the 6,300 post offices we're talking about are all standalone? They're all independent, like government-run, post office-run?
Crown Corporation.
Post offices, yeah.
Yes.
I just not using the right word there, I know. Okay, so those 6,300, so how many of those are in Hamilton?
I'm sorry, I don't know that.
Generally? Would there be 5, or would there be, I mean, there's a post office outlet.
Okay.
In Shoppers Drug Mart. But,
yeah.
But I'm not aware.
I think there's 5 or 6. I think there's 5 or 6 post offices in Hamilton. I know there's 3 in Burlington. So, but we would be having ATM machines as well.
I'm sorry, you'd be having what?
ATM machines? Yes. that you wouldn't have to go to your post office. You could use a postal bank ATM machine as well, which wouldn't
Are
be
some
costly.
things that you need to go to the post office or the bank for. Okay, so if none of those, if banking is not going to be provided at the locations within retail stores, then
Well, we're trying to get back them, Shoppers Drug Mart, we're trying to get that to be unionized Canada Post employees instead of people that work for Shoppers Drug Mart.
If we
So
could,
that would add a lot more.
I just respectfully, Pam, Councillor Vanderbeek didn't get a chance to finish her question. So we'll just, I know, it's just a little procedural thing. So Councillor Vanderbeek, feel free to finish your question.
thank you. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I guess my question then is, I'll reword it. If it were to extend to those retail outlets, do you have any confidence that those retail outlets would be in a position to provide the infrastructure? And I wasn't even thinking about the unionized employees, but the infrastructure to look after the money and, I mean, to literally keep the money safe and provide the banking service, because their counters are pretty small. You know, it's a back storeroom and a front counter, and that's about it in those retail outlets. So I guess my concern around all of that is that although I understand it offers another choice to people, if we're not sure that we're going to be able to be competitive in what postal banking is actually offering, it's a huge expense to find out. And if it's not going to be in the retail outlets, then how is it going to be that convenient for people, other than an ATM like President's Choice, for instance, that's in the grocery store and a few other places? Can you answer that question?
A lot of the drugstores, well, they do deal with money now, as you know. They take in money from parcels, they take in money from a lot of things. But some of them are a little too small, but other ones are fairly big. We do have, in Scarborough, we have opened up a state-of-the-art post office, where it's 24-hour post office, and we're trying to implicate some more of them, where it would be one-stop shop. You'd buy everything there. And they have safes there now at the Shoppers Drug Marts. So so what I'm saying is some of the Shoppers Drug Marts wouldn't be accessible because they are too small, but there's quite a few of them that are bigger.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so the one you're talking about, the state-of-the-art, that's within a retail store?
It's a retail store, 24 hours a day. It's right now they have charging stations for cars for if you go in and do your post office stuff. You can mail a letter, you can do your own parcels and mail your own parcels right there 24 hours a day.
I have something like that up in Meadowlands, but my question really is that state-of-the-art one that you're describing part of a Shoppers Drug Mart or a store?
No, yes it is.
Okay, and is that a licensee or franchisee, or is that a Canada Post owned store?
It's Canada Post owned store.
So it's a standalone post office,
Yes,
basically?
yes.
Just a comment. Can I make a comment? I'll
Yes,
word it
Laura.
as a question. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So would it be fair to say that communities that today have no banks would benefit from postal banking because they do have a post office?
Yes.
And they would benefit, thank you, and that they would benefit more than in a community like this that has a postal outlet in virtually every Shoppers Drug Mart on many, many corners?
I think it's very doable. We think it's very doable.
And my last question, and through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, would it be fair to say then that the competition would be much easier in a place like a town or a community that had no current bank, than much more competitive than it would be to have it in a community like this where banking is very accessible everywhere you look?
I'd have to agree that it would probably be more successful in rural areas and, other places where banking is not accessible. But we're also talking about people that they have a bank account, but they don't have a bank account, or they have a bank account and don't use it, or some of the banks won't even give people loans, It's an alternative to payday lenders as well. That's what we're trying to get out. So you don't have to go to the payday lenders. You can come to the post office and we will cash your checks or what have you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
That's my questions.
Excellent usage of the Jeopardy phrasing as a question, Councillor. Councillor Conley?
Thank you. Some of the concerns Councillor Van der Beek already talked about, but I know when this first came up, and I know Councillor Green brought it up 8 months ago or some time ago, because people trying to get money were getting gouged. That's what attracted me to having a post office one, so we can have reasonable interest rates, if you want to say, so that they can afford it. We're hurting vulnerable people by putting them into debt. If they're paying 600% interest, if it's compounded over time, that's just not right. So I'm really for post office trying to control the interest rate, affordable for a lot of people that it's not. That's great, and I hope we can do something. The other thing is, you mentioned, and I agree with too, is there's a lot of small communities without any banking now, and that should not be, but it is. And I think we have to make sure that they can at least do basic banking. I think if you try as the post office to go in competition directly with the banks for mortgages and investments and everything, I think the infrastructure will be so big for you that it'd be hard to make a profit. So I look at this as a smaller scale. I look at it as helping people with their checks, cashing them, and loans up to a certain amount, and put them in areas that are convenient. And I think in the long run, I know you're trying to get the word out, and I appreciate it. In the long run, I think the government is going to have a lot to do with what you can do or can't do. They might allow you to do this and this and this, but you can't do this and this and this because it would be too expensive on your part, and we wouldn't really gain anything in the long run. So I really don't have a question for you unless you want to comment, but I am in favor of it, but I looked at it as a lot smaller than being everything to everybody like the banks are. I don't think you can do that and be profitable. So fine if you don't. That's fine.
Well,
A bit of a rhetorical question, but certainly lots packed into that statement, Pam. If you feel you would like to respond, feel free to do so.
well, it would help. It would help the low income, the indigenous and low income families, and disabled too, right? There's a lot of disabled people but I mean, in Newfoundland alone, it takes, let's see here, I've got written down, Newfoundland has taken by far the farthest hit. 84% of the communities in Newfoundland do not have a bank. So if you're up in, let me pronounce this correctly, Nain, which used to have a bank, and if you're up there and you have to go to the post office, it's a 5-day boat ride to get down to Happy Valley Goose Bay. So, but they have everybody has a post office though. So that's just one example. Yes, it would be very helpful that way.
Excellent. Councillor Conley? Okay. We have Councillor Partridge, followed by myself, unless there's any other first-time speakers. Councillor Partridge, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Pam, welcome, and thank you for a great presentation. On the Canada Post slide, 1980s to now, it quotes that in 1982, Michael Warren said that there were 2,000 communities in Canada which had a post office but no bank, and suggested that the Postal Service could step into this service vacuum. And you've spoken to that a couple of times. But in the report, I'm just hoping that you can help me reconcile this, because in the report that's in front of us on page 3 of 4, at the very bottom, it says, former Canada Post President Michael Warren in the Toronto Star in December 2015 wrote, a new review will likely conclude there is no sustainable business platform left for Canada Post that won't require massive subsidies, and that Canada Post should be privatized and the proceeds go to paying off as much of its debt and pension shortfall as possible. So I'm trying to reconcile those two statements, which to me are at complete opposite ends.
I read that as well.
Yeah, so I thought I heard you say through you, Mr. Chair, that you would be able to offer the service at much reduced fees and reduced costs. And yet the very person that's being quoted as supporting that statement is putting something forward that is completely opposite. How do you reconcile that?
How times have changed. Okay? In 1982, he was definitely for postal banking, and now I'm not sure if he's in the private sector now or why his opinion has changed. I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
And I appreciate that, Pam. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm always a little concerned about any presentation that quotes someone, especially from 1982, when in the report recently it's a completely different point of view, and we wouldn't have known that, only just that.
Yes.
So ultimately, because I think, and again, I appreciate your presentation and hearing the statements about how you could do this and you could do that, and understanding where those are coming from. But ultimately, where does the decision-making come from on if this would happen and how it would be legislated and exactly what it would entail? Where does that decision come from? Who has to push that?
The CEO of Canada Post has to push that. And we have been working with Justin Trudeau as well, and he is encouraging the CEO of Canada Post to go forward with expansion.
So thank you. But is it fair to say that ultimately the decision-making lies with Parliament? It's the federal government.
Well, we're a Crown corporation, but the federal government, I believe, does have a big say in what happens.
I would suggest that they would be the decision makers in it. But thank you, Pam. I appreciate that very much. Appreciate your answers.
So I have myself on now. I'd like to pass the chair over to Councillor Farr. Councillor Farr, excellent. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Pam. Pam, certainly appreciate you coming in. We've waited. As you can see, lots of interest already generated through your presentation, recognizing, of course, that through Cup W, your work, not just postal banking, but of course, door-to-door delivery. Can you comment on the profitability of Canada Post here as an entire Crown Corporation as a whole here recently?
Well, if you ask the CEO of Canada Post, they're losing money. But in their taxes, they've last year, $63 million profit after everything was paid, after taxes.
A profitable operation, $63 million surplus in profits.
Yes.
Postal banking representing a small opportunity inside the Crown Corporation. In your opinion, that is to create more sustainability, is that correct?
More sustainability. I don't believe it would give any more jobs because we'd use our own employees as it is, but it would be more sustainable and yes, and help out the public.
And Pam, are you aware that the fight for door-to-door, that the land use planning, that this council actually went to about as far as any municipality can go in terms of trying to fight for the city's right-of-way and all of that? Are you aware that that's here in Hamilton?
Definitely aware. I've been working with MP Scott Duvall quite a bit, and we are trying to get 850,000 people across the country lost their door-to-door in 2013 with Canada Post 5-point plan. And we want that, well, the federal government has put that plan to a stop now, but we want to reverse it and have the 850,000 people that lost their home delivery have it reinstated. It's a public service.
And I'm not clear, and I know it is, because it's a Crown Corporation as a whole that we're dealing with, and when the staff presentation comes forward, I'll be asking staff about how many people we lost in terms of the door-to-door delivery here, but I can tell you just around this table, the councillors that were affected by it certainly fought and supported for, to the best of our ability, to be able to keep within our rights as a municipality door-to-door service and the implementation of the big boxes. With regards to the big banks, the big five, in your opinion, because I hear sometimes people talk about the private sector as being free market, in the Canadian context, is it fair to say it's a cartel? I'll say it's a cartel. How about that?
Thank you.
So given that it's a cartel and that it's not open to competition,
Right.
I'm sorry? Given that it's a cartel, in my opinion, and acts like a cartel and operates like a cartel, offering this as a viable solution, you referenced rural communities, indigenous communities, and inner city core. So in situations where we've had urban flight of banks, would there be an openness and a willingness to look at how we can bring back local banking into those communities? Because as identified by Councillor Vanderbeek and some great questions around the table, considerations I hadn't had certainly, I don't know of any post offices in inner cities that are like old school post offices. Most of them got turned over. So your suggestion that for the day-to-day banking, we'd be able to look at ATMs, is that correct?
For your everyday banking and ATM, yes.
And so given that in the big five banking operating as a cartel, kind of their value or their responsibility is to their shareholders, correct? Which is what...
Well, that's who they care about. It's if you don't have money in your pocket or a big bank account, they really aren't there to help you out. They're all about profit, not service.
Profit going to their privately held shareholders. Who are the shareholders in Canada Post?
We are the shareholders of Canada Post. Canada Post is a public sector. We own Canada Post.
So invariably,
every one of us.
The value, the fiduciary duty to the shareholders through Canada Post is to the residents and citizens of Canada.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And so I appreciate you coming in today. We do have a second-time speaker in Councillor Whitehead. And if you could keep it if you want. No? Okay. I'll take the chair back. Thank you.
Thank you. Just some points of clarification. Under the the federal act that regulates and empowers Canada Post, do you recall what the mandate is? I mean, I don't recall, and I've read through it, that they're about making profits. They're about providing a sustainable service for the country. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So they would be working under a different auspices versus the banks that are trying to get the biggest return for their shareholders.
Absolutely.
So I just want to highlight that being a key point. You also identified that there's been very successful Canada Post banking systems in 63 countries. So clearly there are models that have been successful in 63 countries.
Yes.
There were some questions around some of the Shoppers Drug Marts. I know I have one in Garrow. It's a big corner. It's not, I mean, I don't know where the small thing comes from because it's a big countertop. They deal with cash constantly already.
Yes.
So there's no question that those decisions would be rendered by the Canada Post, not by you, and therefore they would do their own feasibility to determine where they have opportunities and where they could provide and fill those voids. Would that be a comment?
Absolutely, yes.
So they would have to do their own feasibility. The last time they did one, as you said, you got a report that's been redacted significantly. You're looking at the current circumstances in regards to access to banking facilities across the country, and at one time there used to be banks in almost every. I mean, I know in my ward I had several. Now we got 3. So clearly there's something going on with the banking industry that's removing that brick and mortar and converging into big locations where you can drive through or whatever. But it really is taking the banks out of the communities or out of the neighborhoods. So this is different circumstances today than there were in previous years.
Absolutely. We want to bring it back, yes.
And then just on the Warren comment, we don't know if Mr. Warren is currently on a board for a bank We don't know if he's consulting for a competing interest. So for him to make his comment today versus when he was actually in the role could be the context in why he made those comments.
Well, I believe something has happened, just like Deepak Chopra. He was a CEO of Pitney Bowes, which we know is the biggest printing company, privatized printing company. So, yeah, I think he's probably got a different interest in something else now.
I guess the point is that there could be conflicting interest. Clearly, when he was head of Canada Post, he had a specific role to fulfill. He took a position based on all the information that he had in that position. Now he's no longer associated with Canada Post. We're not sure what he's associated with. That could influence some of his comments recently.
I concur with you 100%.
Thank you very much. Are there any other speakers? May I please have a motion to receive? Pam, thank you so much for coming. A unanimous motion to receive. Moved by Conley, seconded by Ferguson. All those in favor? Carried. Thanks again, Pam, for coming. Lots of discussion, lots of great information out there. We now have item 8.1, which is our staff report, which was tabled from the June 1st meeting. Are there any? We have a motion to receive. Councillor Johnson, moved by Councillor Pearson. All those in favor? Carried. I would now like to turn the chair over to Councillor Ferguson so that I may present my motion respecting item 9.1. Councillor Ferguson?
Yep. So do you want to place your motion?
Yes, sir. The motion is before you, whereas we need a public review of Canada Post to discuss the future of our options for building a successful 21st century post office with the ability to meet the needs of Canadians and create new revenue streams, such as postal banking. And whereas there is an urgent need for this service because thousands of rural towns and villages do not have a bank, and nearly 2 million Canadians desperately need alternatives to payday lenders. And whereas postal banking helps keep bank offices viable and financial services accessible in many parts of the world, and whereas postal banking has the support of hundreds of municipalities and close to 2/3 of Canadians, therefore be it resolved that the City of Hamilton support the addition of postal banking at Canada Post with a mandate to promote financial inclusion, and that the Mayor, on behalf of City of Hamilton, call on the federal government to review Canada Post to recommend the addition of financial banking services at Canada Post, or, at a minimum, a task force to determine how to deliver new financial banking services throughout our post office. That is my motion, and it is...
Is there a seconder to that motion? Seconded by Councillor Whitehead.
Yes.
Okay. Any further comments before I open up to members of council?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You'll know that we've been working through this in many different ways, beginning with payday lending, which highlighted the urban flight of our major banking institutions, backfilled by what I consider to be a predatory industry, preying on some of our most vulnerable who are financially precarious, don't have access to banking, and are thus presented with the only option of payday lenders. We've also, around this table, had at length discussions and almost unanimous support for door-to-door banking services as it relates to our rural communities as well as our inner city and urban communities. And so this seems like a very rational next step as a municipality. The wording is as such that we recognize the jurisdiction of Canada Post as an arm's-length corporation, and that we are simply supporting this in this motion by asking the government for a full review based on the mandate in the letters patent of Canada Post, which does have banking as an available option. I'd like to thank Pam for coming in, as well as Councillor Whitehead and others around the table who've been kind of beating this drum for quite some time. Later in today, I'll be also presenting a motion relating to our payday loan regulatory processes here through our bylaw, which is also related. So certainly, based on all the information that we've provided, we recognize that we don't have the final say, but as a municipality, we certainly do have a say. And so with that, I'd like to ask for everybody's support in supporting Canada Post, Cup W, and the postal banking services. Those are my comments for now, and I look forward to hearing everybody else's.
Okay, I have Mayor Eisenberger and Councillor Whitehead on the speakers list, so Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the presentation earlier. I think it made some interesting points about what's possible under postal banking and what has happened before, and certainly what has happened in other countries, I think is very interesting. I also read in the reports that a number of others have talked about, the Conference Board of Canada specifically, have talked about the underlying conditions that allowed it to be successful in other countries aren't necessarily here in Canada. So I think that's a challenge that I think Canada Post will have to deal with and face. But on the other side of the coin, I see merit and opportunity in this whole payday loan area. Obviously, there's a need in our country for people with lesser means to get affordable loans to do the kind of things that they want to do, over and above what the payday loan community is doing to them, which is nothing short of legalized loan sharking. So I think there's an opportunity in that area for sure, and other areas in terms of financial services that might be doable through Canada Post. So I support this direction. I think it's helpful for us to put our voice to this. If there's an opportunity, and obviously we leave it in the hands of our good federal government to make an assessment, or the Crown Corporation and the federal government to make an assessment as to the viability of this from a national perspective. I think that that's a much more challenging effort than saying today that we're here to support this. So, I think we could encourage the government to have a very serious look at this. I think there's some merits here that potentially could help citizens in our community, especially those that are prone to using payday loans, and/or services that other banks don't necessarily provide. And I think of ePost, which I've been using for years, is very helpful in terms of getting your invoices from various different sources all in one location. I think it's a service they already provide. It's very helpful. Online banking, there's no question that online banking, to answer Councillor Whitehead's question, there's definitely something happening in the banking industry. Moving away from branches and moving towards online banking on the internet. I personally haven't visited a bank in probably 4 years. It's all online banking. And maybe I'm fortunate, or I don't want to be in a lineup, but everything that I need to do, I can do online. So there's certainly room for others to step into that space, and Canada Post could certainly kind of consider that as an opportunity as well. So I support the motion, I support the direction, I support the federal government and the Crown Corporation having a very serious look at what's possible. And given that there are many post office branches, which I suspect probably also is something that's going to change, there is room, I think, in the online areas for much improved service for constituents, especially in the smaller communities. I think that's something that we have to think about. So, we're well served in Hamilton with a number of major financial institutions. That isn't necessarily the case in smaller communities throughout the country, and I think that's certainly worthy of consideration by the federal government and the Crown Corporation. So I support the direction, support the motion, and I appreciate all the input that the CUPW has provided for us today.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, Acting Deputy Mayor. I'm very supportive of going through the feasibility. I don't think anyone around this table is saying put something in there that's going to create a significant deficit and not provide the service and fill the voids that are needed to be filled. This report, and I want to be clear, and this is what I think this is the key, is it is asking Canada Post to look at it, whether it's a task force or feasibility, but let's take another look at the whole service industry and providing banking services through the Canada Post outlets. At the end of the day, how they deliver it, where they deliver it, all that will be determined through the studies that yet to be rendered to justify it. I got every faith that an objective process will unfold. I know that municipalities across this country are making the same request. And at the end of the day, if the feasibility is there, then I got to think that it will be implemented. So certainly, from my perspective, I want to provide that persuasion for the Canada Post to start making the investment in starting the feasibility on postal banking in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Acting Deputy Mayor, and I just want to commend Councillor Green for beginning the conversation. Instead of just jamming the notice of motion through about 6-7 months ago when he first introduced it, he allowed ample opportunity for the conversation to unfold to the point where I think it's just an absolute perfect, appropriate timing today, where we've got the representative that came in, Pam Taschuk from the CUPW. We had a very good report from our own staff. I think, unfortunately, we just glossed over it without giving kudos and thanks to our city staff employee, Rosaria Morelli, for putting together a good package of the report, the information report, saying about the pros and cons of it, mostly pros, and the odd con basically being currently from the management that we heard from. Councillor Green needs to be commended again for supporting an element of public service that's important to our community, to seniors, to those most vulnerable. Once again, I want to acknowledge and mention the tone, the new tone, since October 19th of last year with the new federal government that's in Ottawa, that I think will hopefully lead to influencing some changes. Already, I'm encouraged by the fact that the current study of Canada Post that was commissioned by the new tone of the new federal government in the spring of this year already said privatization is ruled out completely for the Crown Corporation. And lastly, Mr. Acting Deputy Mayor, when 600 plus municipalities across the country feel it's important enough to chime in and say it's a valuable public service to their citizens, I think it's important that we join them. So that's why I'll be supporting it here today. Thanks, Mr. Acting Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I have no other speakers. Sorry, Councillor Vanderbeek would like to speak.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think what I don't want to rehash what's been said, but I'm very supportive of the comments that have already been delivered by my colleagues. I just wanted to say that I am going to support this. I think that it's important to support and the federal government. Their assessment of the feasibility of should be a continuous process for them, and I think that we need to be supportive of that and supportive of anything that continues the process of growing with the changing needs of the community and supporting what the community needs. So I will definitely be supporting this. So thank you.
So I have no other speakers now at this point, so I'll put the motion. All in favor?
Carried.
Opposed, if any? The motion carries. Chair, back to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson.